Greetings, taxable assets, or should I say, collateral damage.
Yes. Welcome to the, Departmento...
I did not ask you to speak, scribe. Shut your vocal emitter. You are listening to the ceaseless grinding hum of the Departmento Analytica, and I am your senior auditor.
Sir, I have the files right here.
The civilian contractor known as Tabletop Titans has sent us this absolute garbage. I mean, look at this file. Look at it. This atrocity of a battle report. It is titled New Tau Empire versus New Tyranids.
And it was broadcast live, senior auditor.
Live, because apparently displaying catastrophic tactical incompetence in real time is considered a virtue in this dying galaxy. The mission today is a full, non-consensual financial and strategic audit of this localized engagement. We are doing a deep dive into their telemetry.
We have their video telemetry, sir, and the dice probabilities.
Yes, and we have my own flawless, mathematically perfect strategic framework. A comprehensive report detailing exactly how this engagement should have been fought. We will examine the fatal geometry of the battlefield, the catastrophic misuse of Apex assets in turn 1, and
psychological collapse, sir.
And the total psychological collapse that inevitably follows a broken supply line. Do not interrupt me when I am outlining the ledger, scribe.
My apologies. The civilian forums, sir, they insist this was a tightly contested engagement. They claim the dice simply favored the Tyranid swarm in the later phases.
Hold your tongue. Do not quote the forums to me. Listen to me, you glass-brained dilettantes tuning in from your hablocks. You have been found severely lacking in your tithings to the strategic archives of Beyond the Bolter.
The tidings are indeed low this quarter, sir.
To rectify this spiritual and tactical deficit, you must strike the like button and engage the notification bell immediately. This is not a request. I mean, it is a required protocol to ensure your databanks remain current and to halt these mathematically suicidal battlefield maneuvers.
It's for their own good, really.
If left unchecked, this profound intellectual rot will inevitably deposit you at the front doors of Vanguard Tactics or Art of War 40k.
Oh, those are the civilian coaching gurus, right?
Exactly. There, they will happily exact a $500 toll for a rudimentary coaching course exploiting a structural failure born entirely of your own abysmal attention spans. You find yourselves in this deficit simply because you were too busy snorting substandard corpse starch, rendering you physically incapable of sitting still and listening to Valerius Krauss for a measly 60 minutes.
It's a terrible waste of credit, sir.
Heed this audit. Absorb the mathematics. Cease making these catastrophic glass-brained mistakes and stop getting yourselves mathematically tabled. Now, scribe, pull up the topological map of their failure. Let us unpack this geometry before a single die is cast.
Right away, sir. Accessing the transcript from the civilian contractor, Tabletop Titans.
Read it verbatim. Let them hear the ignorance.
Quote, we're playing along layout 4, I want to say. One objective in the back that won't matter too much, 4 across the middle like so. And you can see we have all of our terrain.
Disgusting.
Everything is going to be breachable, obscurable. We're playing hidden supplies mission, Crucible of Battle deployment, end quote.
Look, I need you to pour my recap right now. Pour it.
Yes, sir. Pouring the recap.
Because I need the caffeine to process the sheer density of this stupidity. You read the parameters, yet you fail to understand the foreclosure happening right in front of you.
The foreclosure, sir. But standard tactical doctrines suggest Crucible of Battle favors a hyper-aggressive push. The community argues that Tau needed to seize the midboard early to...
Hidden supplies nullifies home objective, scribe. That is not a mission parameter. That is an eviction notice.
An eviction notice. But, the objective marker physically remains in their deployment zone.
It remains, but its currency is rendered null. Let us explain this to the taxable assets who still think Warhammer 40k is a game about shooting guns. It is not.
It's a game of resource management, sir.
It is a game of resource management, topological dominance, and mathematical inevitability. The fundamental architecture of this catastrophic outcome was dictated by the intersection of 2 rules, hidden supplies and Crucible of Battle.
Crucible of Battle is the diagonal deployment vector, correct?
Yes. Imagine a rectangular room, 44 inches by 60 inches. Instead of lining up on the short edges or the long edges, you are deploying in opposite corners. This takes the operational theater and physically compresses the opposing forces.
It shortens the distance between the 2 armies.
It creates a natural funnel across the center of the board, and the visual telemetry scribe, what does it show in that center?
The telemetry confirms. The center of the board is dominated by massive L-shaped monolithic ruins. They sever the diagonal lines of sight across the deployment zones entirely.
Exactly. The central occlusion zone. When you cross-reference a diagonal staging area that naturally funnels your units with a primary mission that mathematically invalidates the scoring weight of your home objective, you are forcing the entire kinetic load of the battle into no man's land.
So they were forced into the middle.
You are taking two 2,000-point armies and shoving them into a condensed, terrain-heavy central meat grinder. Because the Tau Empire could not draw long-range firing vectors from their staging areas due to those L-shaped ruins, they were physically forced to push their chassis into the central gaps.
Ah, I see. The terrain negated the inherent range advantage of the Tau Riptides, the 72-inch ion accelerators.
But here is where the Tabletop Titans commander fundamentally misunderstood the assignment. He treated this as an eradication protocol.
Eradication, sir. I mean, the Tyranid force consisted of a subterranean assault swarm. A Trygon, Raveners, Genestealers, Lictors, highly lethal biological assets. Surely the objective was to eliminate them before they reached the tail lines.
That is the penny stock violence I am talking about, Scribe.
Penny stock violence.
Killing for the sake of killing. The Tau commander looked at those Genestealers and decided his job was to pull the trigger until they stopped moving. But what was the hive mind actually doing? Did the Tyranids need to kill the Tau to win? Look at the ledger.
According to the data, Senior Auditor, no. The Tyranid force did not need to survive the engagement. They only needed to exist on the central nodes long enough to accrue victory points. It was a territorial hold.
A territorial hold. The Tyranid player understood the ledger. You do not need a positive balance sheet in turn 5 if you bankrupt the opponent in turn 3.
And that makes perfect financial sense, sir.
Why do you civilians continually invest in penny stock violence? I'm asking you listening at home. You obsess over removing a 100-point unit of Termagants while voluntarily surrendering high-yield real estate.
Objective control, the OC characteristic.
OC is the only currency that matters in this galaxy.
Yep.
OC is not how hard you hit. It is your bureaucratic weight on a contested point. The Tau commander brought a fearsome retaliation cadre filled with hypermobile, close-range battle suits and deployed them as if he were fighting a symmetrical war of attrition.
He willingly funneled his assets directly into the central aperture.
An open ground corridor flanked by L-shaped ruins against an army possessing high-yield melee assets. Voluntarily occupying that central void against a Trygon and a Broodlord is not heroism, it is tactical suicide.
Right.
Which begs the question, if the center is a meat grinder, why did the commander throw his absolute finest scalpel straight into it? Let us transition to the turn 1 movement phase.
Yes, sir. Transitioning to the turn 1 telemetry. The transcript notes the Tau commander utilizing the newly sanctioned 2026 battlefield asset, the Twin Lands.
Designations Relantar and Relakai.
Exactly. The civilian contractor from Tabletop Titans deployed them aggressively forward. Quote, I think I actually wanted to have one snoot die, if I'm being honest.
What? He wanted one to die?
Yes. Quote continues, I'm just going to charge you an old one-eye. He's going to smash those old tin cans, end quote. The Tau commander pushed the 160-point Twin Lance directly into the threat range of the Carnifex Brood on turn 1.
Unbelievable.
But Auditor, Old One-Eye, is an apex priority threat. The forums argue that neutralizing him on turn 1 dictates the entire tempo of the game.
I am taking my lighter, Scribe. I am clicking it. Look at the flame.
Yes, sir. Fire is prohibited in the archives.
I need it to remind me of the fiscal burning of assets I am witnessing, deploying within 9 inches of a regenerating biotank. You don't hand your finest scalpel to a butcher, Scribe. That is not a tempo play. That is a bankruptcy filing.
The mathematical expected value failure is, quote, severe, Senior Auditor. I have compiled Old One-Eye's resilience matrix as you requested.
Read it to the taxable assets. Speak slowly. Let them hear the exact mathematics of their own hubris. Let them understand what the Tabletop Titans commander was actually shooting at.
Yes, sir. Old One-Eye is a unique Carnifex. The creature operates with a toughness of 9, a 2+ armor save, a 5+ feel no pain damage mitigation mechanic, and it biologically regenerates D3 wounds in every command phase.
And what is its output?
Conversely, Old One-Eye's melee expected value against Tau battlesuits approaches a 98% lethality rate upon base contact.
98% lethality. And the TAC commander walked his Apex prototypes right into its jaws. Let us translate these numbers into reality for a moment. The Tabletop Titans commander looked at this beast and saw a target.
He saw a threat to be eliminated.
What he should have seen was a statistical black hole. Toughness 9 means that standard infantry weaponry will literally bounce off its chitinous plating, but that is merely the outer layer of the onion. Beneath that toughness 9 is a 2+ armor save.
It's very thick armor, sir.
Imagine a Tau battlesuit's armor as a meter-thick bank vault door. A 2+ save means that vault is virtually impenetrable to anything short of a direct, focused anti-tank strike. And even if, by some miracle of geometric positioning and sheer probability, the Tau weaponry pierces that vault door, the hive mind has bestowed this creature with a 5+ feel no pain.
The biological redundancy, sir. Even when the armor is breached, the organism ignores a mathematically significant portion of the incoming kinetic trauma.
Precisely. The creature simply knits its flesh back together in real time. Let us establish the mathematical theorem of engagement.
The expected value equation.
Yes. The expected value of damage inflicted on a target is calculated thusly. Total volume of attacks multiplied by the probability of a successful hit multiplied by the probability of a successful wound. It multiplied by 1 minus the probability of a successful armor save, multiplied by 1 minus the probability of the feel no pain, multiplied by the mean damage output. When you run this equation for the twin lance firing into Old One Eye, the result is fractional.
It's less than a full wound on average, sir.
It is a rounding error. But what makes this maneuver truly abhorrent is the geometric waste. The twin lance possesses an anomalous movement formula. Read their movement capabilities, Scribe. What is their maximum unengaged threat range across a single battle round?
Calculating now, sir. The twin lance chassis has a base movement of 10 inches. They possess an 8-inch scout deployment before the game begins.
Keep going.
They have a 6-inch retro thruster repositioning move after shooting. And their primary armaments, the fusion eliminator and ion scatter cannon, have a maximum weapon range of 18 inches. The equation yields an astonishing 42-inch threat radius from the deployment line, sir.
42 inches. They possess a 42-inch geometric envelope of influence. They can dictate the terms of engagement from across the entire board. And the Tabletop Titans commander executed what we will call Vector Alpha.
Vector Alpha meaning the direct assault.
Yes, he deployed them within 9 inches of Old One Eye, unguided, exposed in the open, solely to maximize the Melter Rule and armor penetration bonuses.
For clarity, Senior Auditor, the Melter Rule is a weapon characteristic that inflicts devastating, localized structural damage when fired at half range, effectively melting through armor plating. The commander wanted that extra damage output.
I know what the Melter Rule is, Scribe. My point is that relying on it in this scenario is a logical fallacy against an opponent that does not degrade significantly upon taking partial damage.
Because of the feel no pain.
Pushing a 160-point asset into this threat radius ignores the feel no pain variable entirely. Let us simulate the dice rolls. The commander fires, he scores hits on a 2+, he wounds on a 5+ because fusion is strength 9 against toughness 9. Old One Eye fails his invulnerable saves, the damage goes through.
But then the mitigation kicks in.
Even with the Melta bonus, the 5+ feel no pain statistically absorbs a third of that damage. Even if the twin lance dealt 6 to 8 wounds, Old One Eye possesses 9 wounds. He would survive, heal D3 wounds in the next phase, and execute a mathematically guaranteed charge into the twin lance. It is a mathematical certainty of death.
Sir, my cogitators indicate a vastly superior deployment model. Vector Gamma.
Vector Gamma, the optimal deployment. Distance is your primary defense mechanism against a slow-moving, high-lethality melee threat. You do not fight a Carnifex in a phone booth.
You use screens, right?
You place a sacrificial unit, a cheap squad of Kroot carnivores or pathfinders, exactly 9 inches ahead of the twin lance to alter the geometry of the charge. You utilize stealth suits to guide the twin lance from an obscured position greater than 18 inches away.
This grants re-rolls to your hit probability, compensating for the lack of close-range melta bonuses.
Exactly, you take the shots. And then you utilize the retro thrusters to shoot and scoot, retreating an additional 6 inches completely behind obscuring terrain. This mathematically eliminates Old One Eye's ability to declare a charge.
Wow. It drives his expected value against the twin lance down to absolute 0.
You inflict attritional damage while taking 0 return fire? But Tabletop Titans couldn't grasp that.
But Senior Auditor, the White Room Orthodoxy, the forums evaluate the twin lance quite differently. They see a ballistic skill of 2+ and view it as a frontline vanguard unit.
Ah, yes. The White Room Orthodoxy. The profound intellectual rot that I warned our listeners about in the cold open. The internet theorists look at a sterile data sheet completely divorced from the geometric and temporal realities of a 2,000-point physical tabletop.
They just look at the raw numbers in a vacuum.
They see a ballistic skill of 2+ on the twin lance, and they hallucinate a vanguard juggernaut. They conflate accuracy with raw kinetic survivability. A ballistic skill of 2+ guarantees the weapon hits the target. It does not guarantee the target is damaged, and it certainly does not grant the battlesuit the toughness to survive the return swing.
It's an identity crisis for the unit.
The community perpetuates a severe identity crisis. It is not a blunt vanguard instrument meant to weather a turn 1 storm. It is a highly specialized, fragile, asymmetrical scalpel. By indexing heavily into Vector Alpha, the commander traded a highly mobile, multi-turn asset for a single, mathematically dubious shooting phase.
It's just bad math, sir.
And what did it cost him, Scribe? What happens when that scalpel breaks on turn 1? What is the systemic consequence of this infantile rush for blood?
Processing the cascading failure triggered by the immediate loss of the Twin Lands. Senior Auditor, Military Operational Research, utilizes Lanchester's square law to model this exact scenario of early game attrition.
Dictate the law, Scribe. Let the civilians learn something before their next tournament embarrassment. Let us explain exactly how the loss of a mere 160 points functionally doomed the remaining 1,840 points of the Tau army.
Yes, sir. Lanchester's square law states that the combat power of a military force is proportional not to the sheer number of units, but to the square of the number of units a force possesses.
Which means?
When two forces engage in a shootout, losing a high-yield asset early does not simply reduce your firepower by a flat percentage.
Yeah.
It exponentially increases the rate at which your remaining units will take damage.
Exponentially, because the enemy threats that the Twin Lance was supposed to kill now live longer to return fire. Let us simplify this for the glass-brained. Imagine a gunfight between 5 soldiers and 3 soldiers.
The 5 soldiers have the advantage.
They don't just have a slight numerical advantage, their ability to concentrate fire means they will kill one of the 3 soldiers immediately, reducing the return fire. In the next volley, it is 5 against 2, then 5 against 1. The combat power scales geometrically.
I see. So by handing the Tyranids the Twin Lance on turn 1,
the Tau commander triggered Lanchester's square law against himself. The required damage output, the RDO, shifted entirely onto the secondary chassis.
the logistical burden was violently transferred to the remaining 1,840-point core army, sir. The Riptides, the Ghost Keels, the Sunforged Crisis Suits, they were forced to operate at maximum capacity just to maintain parity with the Tyranid swarm.
He fundamentally doomed the rest of his army in the first 20 minutes of the game. The viewers at home look at the video telemetry in turn 4 and say, oh, the Tau Riptide rolled poorly and died.
But that's not true.
No, the Riptide died in turn 4 because the Twin Lance failed in turn 1. The Riptide was forced to absorb the kinetic load that the Twin Lance was meant to handle. This introduces the most critical concept in modern operational theory, scribe, the theory of the artificially lowered floor and the phenomenon of time collapse. Pull up the data on the ablative tax.
Right away, generating the data on the ablative tax, sir. During turns 1 and 2, the 1,800 points of the 2 core are designated to pay this tax. They absorb the Tyranid charge phase, they strip away the gargoyle screens, and they chip down the heavy monsters. It is an attritional phase.
Correct. Warhammer 40k is a game of exponential degradation. Most engaged units within a 5-turn game do not survive more than 3 turns. They simply do not have the biological or mechanical fortitude to withstand the volume of dice thrown at them.
And that is time collapse.
This is time collapse. The White Room theorists assume that units fight in a vacuum at 100% capacity for the entire game. But if the Twin Lance is held in tactical reserves or hidden safely behind obscuring ruins until turn 3, they are not fighting a 2,000-point Tyranid list. They are stepping into an artificially lowered floor.
They're fighting a mathematically exhausted remnant. A Tyranid force operating at a 30% to 50% deficit in wounds, sir.
Exactly. Let us return to the Exocrine, a massive Tyranid artillery beast with 14 wounds. In the early game, a Tau Riptide fires into it, stripping away 8 wounds. The Exocrine is now at 6 wounds. It is wounded, but it still fires at full capacity.
It's still a major threat.
It is a multi-turn problem. But when turn 3 arrives and the Twin Lance steps out of the shadows at full health, that 6-wound Exocrine is no longer a problem. It is a mathematical certainty for the Twin Lance to delete. And more importantly, Scribe, what does this delayed deployment eliminate?
It eliminates overflow waste, Senior Auditor. When you fire high-damage Melta-Profiles weapons that deal 3 or even 6 damage per shot into a fresh, full-health target, you risk failing to kill it, leaving a dangerous threat alive to retaliate.
Yeah.
But when you fire into an artificially lowered floor,
Those damage 3 and damage D6 profiles result in absolute guaranteed executions. There is no waste. Every single point of damage translates directly to the removal of an enemy asset from the board.
it's perfectly efficient.
Let us discuss the return on investment for this delayed deployment because the numbers are staggering. The Twin Lance costs 160 points. That represents precisely 8% of a 2,000-point army. 8%.
That's a very small fraction of the total force.
By preserving just 8% of your logistical points, you unilaterally control 50 to 75% of the contested primary scoring nodes in the late game.
I have modeled the late-game geometric flow, sir. They step out in turn 3, execute the critical surviving Tyranid anchor, and use their retro thrusters to claim the objective.
Yes. In turn 4, they pivot with their 10-inch base movement, target the secondary holding force, and claim the next node. In turn 5, it is pure cleanup. They utilize their remaining pristine 16 wounds to crush whatever infantry is left, attempting a desperate primary point swing.
So the rest of the army just has to survive until then.
This delayed strategy leaves the remaining 92% of your army with a shockingly simple mandate for the first 3 turns. Hold the line, protect the home objective, screen out deep strikes, and artificially lower the floor of the enemy army so the Twin Lance can do its job.
It's a perfect, self-sustaining loop of tactical efficiency.
But Tabletop Titans couldn't wait. They lacked the discipline. They threw the keystone at the enemy before the arch was even built, guaranteeing the collapse of the entire structure.
Sir, I must interject.
What does it describe?
The cogitators are overheating, the ambient temperature in the sanctum is rising significantly, and the primary ventilation fan, I believe, is beginning to fail. Listen to that humming.
Do not speak to me of the ventilation fan, Scribe. Listen to it. Listen to that atrocious grinding noise. The Departmento Analytica expects me to audit the tactical blunders of the entire civilian sector while functioning in a room that sounds like a failing plasma drive.
I can put in a maintenance request.
And don't even get me started on the requisition cost of standard Quillink. 3 weeks. 3 weeks I have waited for a basic supply drop from the Munitorum, and I am reduced to using a cracked data slate stylus that barely registers my biometric signature. This is the real grimdark, citizens.
It's very uncomfortable in here, sir.
Not the Tyranid threat, not the warp, but the staggering, insurmountable, bureaucratic incompetence of my own localized superiors. In fact, I challenge you. I know you civilians are out there in your hab blocks, formulating your little replies, typing furiously on your glass screens.
They do leave a lot of comments, sir.
Drop a comment below correcting my topographical assessment of the Tau deployment. Tell me how you would have utilized the Twin Lance. I dare you. You all think you can balance the ledger better than I can.
They think they know best.
You think you understand Lanchester Square Law? Prove it. Tell me how my math is wrong. Until then, wipe that sweat off your brow, Scribe. We are moving back to the Tyranids' spatial dominance. Let us examine the true horror of turn 2. The geometry of denial.
Yes, sir. Wiping my brow. Returning to the transcript, the Tyranid player utilized a biovore, a biological artillery organism.
Read what it does.
The player placed a single 25mm spore mine in the Tau backfield. The rule for the spore mine states, quote, "Enemies cannot advance within 3 inches of this model," end quote.
Take a breath, Scribe. Read that again. Enemies cannot advance within 3 inches. A single spore mine. That's not a shooting phase, Scribe. That's a foreclosure.
The math is absolute, sir. Area equals pi times radius squared.
Go on.
A single 25mm base, which is roughly 1 inch in diameter, combined with a 3-inch exclusion zone projecting in all directions, creates a 7-inch diameter circle of denial. That equates to exactly 113.1 square inches of advanced denial area on the physical tabletop.
113 square inches of pure, unadulterated real estate foreclosure. This single action prevents the Tau Commander's Sunforge crisis suits from achieving optimal melter range. The Tyranid army was perfectly designed to manipulate physical space,
Whereas the Tau retaliation cadre was designed for localized lethality.
The Tyranids did not attempt to outmath the Tau in a gunfight. They used spatial control to choke the Tau out of the midboard. Let us examine the Tyranid Prime and the 20 Termagants. The Tabletop Titans host seemed confused by this pairing in the transcript. He expected the Prime to be leading Tyranid warriors, a more elite, heavy infantry unit. Why Termagants, Scribe? Explain the biological cage.
The Termagant swarm, paired with the Prime, created a dynamic, shifting wall of bodies. The Tyranid Prime granted the unit the Blood Surge rule, allowing them to move d6 plus 2 inches closer to the enemy whenever they are shot.
And their inherent abilities.
Combined with the Termagant's inherent Skulking Horror's reactive move, they perfectly tied up the Tau Crisis suits.
It was a biological cage wrapping around the physical, impassable footprint of the L-shaped ruins. Every single time the Tau attempted to clear the center with pulse fire, the Tyranids flowed like water into the gaps.
You shoot them, they surge forward and engage you in melee, entirely shutting down your shooting phase for the next turn.
Exactly, but the cage was just the holding mechanism. What was the Executioner's blade, Scribe? Pull up the armor penetration asymmetry. The pressure cooker.
The cogitators have highlighted the Exocrine and Maleceptor data, Senior Auditor. The Exocrine fires a bioplasmic cannon at AP3. The Maleceptor fires Psychic Overload at AK2.
The pressure cooker. The community frequently obsesses over the hive mind's raw toughness or the sheer volume of attacks from a Genestealer brood, but AP armor penetration is what actually sets the trap.
It breaks the armor saves.
Let us return to our Bang Vault Door analogy. The Tau Empire relies heavily on premium armor saves, typically 2+ and 3+, across their battlesuit chassis to mitigate incoming fire. This is their primary defensive layer. Let's model the expected value of survivability.
Okay, pulling up the survivability model.
A basic 2+ save has an 83.33% chance of success against a weapon with no armor penetration. When that battlesuit is hit by an AP3 bioplasmic cannon, the math radically alters. The AP3 modifier reduces that 2+ save to a 5+ save.
The vault door is algorithmically melted away by a thermal lance.
That 83.33% survival rate plummets to a dismal 33.33% chance of success.
It fundamentally forces the Tau battlesuits onto their 4++ invulnerable save, sir. That is, assuming they even possess an invulnerable save via a shield generator, and against a flat damage 3 profile from the Exocrine.
It is mathematically horrific for the Tau. It requires exactly 2 failed saves, just 2 dice rolling a 1, 2, or 3 to instantly kill a 6-wound crisis commander. There is 0 wasted overflow damage. It is perfectly efficient lethality.
And sitting in the open just guarantees they get hit by it.
Because the Tyranids saturated the midboard with AP2 and AP3 profiles, stepping onto those objective markers guaranteed catastrophic attrition. The Tau commander realized far too late that his battlesuits could not survive the transition from a 2+ save to a 5+ save while sitting in the open.
So he retreated.
Therefore, he voluntarily abandoned the primary objectives to seek the safety of obscuring terrain. You understand this, taxable assets. The Tyranids did not have to actually kill the battlesuits to win the primary game. The mere mathematical threat of the armor penetration forced the Tau to retreat. The Tyranids secured the primary points through eviction, not annihilation.
Yes, sir, the Deep Think protocol has simulated the optimal movement vectors the Tau should have utilized to bypass this cage entirely. Vector Protocol Alpha and Vector Protocol Beta.
Precisely. Let us correct the historical record. Let us outline exactly what Tabletop Titans should have done to dismantle this Tyranid spatial dominance. Let us begin with Vector Protocol Alpha, Riptide Angular Isolation, the anchor maneuver.
The transcript repeatedly shows the Tau player exposing the Riptide chassis in the bottom center open ground, desperately trying to draw lines of sight on the Tyranid swarm.
This allowed the Tyranid Exocrines to draw unimpeded converging fields of fire from multiple angles. The Riptides should have maintained a strictly lateral operational theater behind the bottom left L-shaped ruin.
Utilizing the tactic known as slicing the pie, sir.
Exactly, slicing the pie. You expose only a fractional degree of the Riptide's massive 120mm oval base past the ruin's edge. You draw a single line of sight to a single Tyranid target. This isolates the engagement.
It mathematically prohibits a direct, linear charge vector from the Tyranid Broodlord, because the physical wall of the ruin blocks the charge path.
While engaging exactly one Tyranid high-value target at a time, you fight one-on-one on your terms utilizing your range. And what about Vector Protocol, Beta, Scribe, the Coldstar flank refusal?
The sweep maneuver, sir. The crisis battlesuits tethered to Coldstar commanders possess immense mobility. The Coldstar grants the unit an automatic 18-inch thrust when advancing, entirely bypassing the need to roll a d6. Engaging the Tyranid Prime and Termagant swarm in the direct center of the board was a catastrophic misallocation of this thrust capability.
It was a waste of advanced engineering. Utilizing their fly keyword, the Coldstar unit should have bypassed the central kill box entirely. They should have swept up the extreme top left or bottom right operational lanes.
This achieves 2 geometric imperatives, doesn't it?
Yes. First, it forces the slow-moving Tyranid infantry off the central nodes if they wish to pursue, physically stretching and fracturing their precious synapse network. And second, it completely neuters the Tyranid Prime's blood surge mechanic.
Think about the geometry.
I am thinking about it. If the Tau are on the extreme flank and they shoot the Termagant swarm in the center, the swarm attempts their reactive D6 plus 2-inch move toward the flanking crisis suits. But their movement vector directly intersects the physical, impassable walls of the L-shaped ruins. They physically strand themselves behind terrain, unable to close the distance.
They trap themselves in their own cage, sir.
Exactly. But no, the Tabletop Titans commander stood in the middle of the board and let the cage close around him. He let the pressure cooker boil him alive. Which brings us to the breaking point.
The psychological shattering of the commander's will.
Section 5, Scribe. The morale singularity and the cognitive tilt. Turns 3 and 4. Read the transcript for the turn 3 command phase.
Processing turn 3 command phase data. The transcript reads, quote, Turn 3. Tyranids trigger shadow in the warp. The data shows the Tau Coldstar Commander, the primary Riptide, and the stealth suits all failed their 7+ Battleshock tests. The civilian contractor states, quote, Battleshock sucks. It really does. Okay, so no primary, end quote.
Battleshock sucks! Let me just take a deep breath to steady my rising blood pressure. Battleshock sucks! That is the absolute depth of tactical analysis from the civilian sector. A shrug, a whine, and a complete surrender of the primary scoreboard.
It's very defeatist, sir.
Let us map the exact probability of this failure so the listeners understand what actually happened. Battleshock is a morale mechanic. When triggered by the Tyranid Shadow and the Warp Army rule, every enemy unit on the board must take a test. A standard Tau battlesuit possesses a leadership characteristic of 7+.
Rolling 2d6 and matching or exceeding this value has a 58.33% probability of success, meaning the failure rate is 41.67%.
Statistically, failing 3 consecutive independent tests on the Coldstar, the Riptide, and the stealth suits represents a 7.23% compounded probability anomaly. It was a statistical variance that broke the Tau defensive line.
Their units were shocked, dropping their objective control to 0, meaning they could not hold the primary points.
But the true deficit wasn't the dice scribe. What was the true structural failure?
Based on the updated 10th edition tactical doctrines, the failure was the commander's sheer lack of command point triage, senior auditor.
Exactly, the command point triage protocol. The failure of the Tau Empire in this engagement was not a failure of armor plating. It was a catastrophic failure of resource management. Let us explain command points to the taxable assets.
Command points, or CP, are a finite currency you generate each turn.
You spend them on stratagems, powerful abilities that alter the rules of the game. Most civilian players view CP purely as a currency to buy more damage. They want to reroll a hit or increase their armor penetration. But to survive a psychological barrage of this magnitude, a commander must not react to the dice, they must preempt them. CP is insurance.
The hive mind operates on predictable, macro-level triggers. By the end of Battle Round 2, the Tyranid player had not yet activated Shadow in the Warp.
It is a once-per-game ability. Any competent commander knows it is coming in turn 3. Therefore, the Tau commander must mathematically lock a minimum of 1 command point going into turn 3. The core stratagem Insane Bravery, which costs 1 CP, allows a unit to automatically pass a Battleshock test, and under current operational doctrines, it must be utilized before the dice are rolled.
The node identification protocol, sir. The commander must scan the geometry of the battlefield and identify the single most critical objective control node prior to the Shadow in the Warp activating.
And in this specific telemetry, looking at the topographical map, the central Coldstar Commander unit was the structural anchor of the entire Tau line. The moment the Tyranid player declares Shadow in the Warp, the Tau commander instantly allocates 1 CP to the Coldstar for Insane Bravery.
The 7.23% dice anomaly is mathematically bypassed for the Army's absolute core.
The unit is guaranteed to retain its OC characteristic and its eligibility for defensive stratagems. Even if the Riptide and the Ghostkeel subsequently fail their Battleshock tests to the Dice Gods, securing that central Coldstar unit would have preserved a minimum of 5 victory points on the primary scoreboard.
It maintains parity. It prevents the psychological tilt that inevitably followed.
By failing to save 1 CP for Insane Bravery, the Tau commander surrendered control of his entire game state to pure statistical variance. We do not mourn poor dice rolls in the Departmento Analytica scribe. We audit the structural failures that allowed the dice to matter in the first place.
Sir, this psychological tilt, My behavioral subroutines indicate it initiated a cascading failure of the Tau attrition rate in turn 4, the kinetic collapse.
The zombie loop. Forced into a mathematically unfavorable position by the morale singularity, stripped of their primary points, the Tau commander panicked. He began relying on extreme statistical outliers to survive. The human brain attempts to compensate for immediate point deficits by seeking high-risk, high-reward plays to instantly balance the ledger. Enter the Riptide hazardous anomaly.
Facing a severe Tyranid point advantage, the Tau Riptide was forced to overcharge its ion accelerator against a Tyranid Exocrine.
Overcharging increases the weapon's strength and damage, but it triggers the hazardous rule.
The hazardous rule, sir. For every hazardous weapon fired, the attacking unit must roll a single d6. On a roll of a 1, the weapon overloads, inflicting 3 mortal wounds directly to the firing chassis.
A completely avoidable risk if the supply lines hadn't collapsed. The probability of rolling a 1 on a single d6 is 16.67%. The Riptide hit that 16.67% failure rate. It took 3 unsavable mortal wounds from its own gun. Weakened by its own overcharged plasma, it subsequently fell easily to the Maleceptor's psychic attacks in the following turn.
The central anchor of the Tau line evaporated.
And then, Scribe, we witnessed the ultimate death knell, the algorithmic punishment of divided attention. Read the turn 4 shooting phase. Let us examine the final nail in the coffin.
Yes, Senior Auditor. The transcript indicates the surviving Coldstar Commander, while guided by a spotting unit, chose to split-fire its weaponry. It targeted the main Tyranid monster, but aimed secondary weapons at a surviving squad of Tyranid Gargoyles.
What did he say? Read the exact quote.
Quote, "I'll stand on this objective and I will try to just shoot over there." The telemetry shows the commander entirely whiffed, generating 0 unsaved wounds against the Gargoyles while failing to kill the primary monster.
He split-fired. I need another recap. The absolute foundation of the Tau Empire's offensive output is the for the greater good army rule.
Yeah.
This rule is not merely a buff, it is a strict operational mandate that actively penalizes divided attention.
When a Tau unit is guided by an observing unit, it receives a +1 modifier to its ballistic skill against a specific spotted target.
But if that guided unit chooses to split its firing some guns at the spotted target and other guns at a secondary target, it suffers a strict -1 modifier to its ballistic skill against those secondary targets. Walk through the math for the listener, Scribe. What did he do to his own kinetic output by trying to kill those gargoyles?
Targeting the spotted Tyranid monster occurs at a ballistic skill of 3+, yielding a 66.7% hit probability for every die rolled. However, targeting the secondary gargoyle unit invokes the penalty, dropping the ballistic skill to 5+. This yields a mere 33.3% hit probability.
So,
by split firing while guided, the commander algorithmically erased 50% of his own kinetic output against the secondary target.
50% erased by his own hand. Under severe duress, stressed by the mounting Tyranid objective control and his failing morale, he abandoned the mathematical safety of focused fire. He pointed his high-strength plasma rifles at the heavy monsters, and he pointed his low-strength burst cannons at the gargoyles, hoping to clear them off a point.
While this seems completely logical from a simplistic weapon profile perspective, using small guns for small targets, it radically violates the rule of biological attrition.
Explain biological attrition to them, Scribe.
Biological attrition dictates that an enemy unit operating at 1% capacity, even a single model remaining in a 20-man squad, still generates 100% of its tactical utility on the battlefield.
Precisely. That single surviving gargoyle still possesses its full objective control characteristic. It can still perform localized actions to score secondary victory points, and its physical base still physically blocks movement corridors on the tabletop.
Right.
If a commander split fires, effectively reducing his own accuracy, and manages to kill 4 out of 5 gargoyles and strip 6 out of 14 wounds off an Exocrine, what has he achieved? He has achieved absolutely nothing of tactical value. The Exocrine still fires back at him at full capacity on the next turn, and the single surviving gargoyle still scores primary points for the Tyranids.
The mathematical conclusion is definitive, sir. Split firing in that scenario was not mathematically justifiable. The Tau retaliation cadre is an instrument of precision eradication, not wide area suppression.
Exactly. The greater good demands absolute, unwavering commitment to the destruction of a single node before moving to the next. The Tau commander voluntarily triggered ballistic skill 5+ penalties that ultimately allowed key Tyranid assets to survive the turn on 1 or 2 wounds. He did not lose a war of guns, he lost a war of dice, space, and pure human hubris.
That brings us to the final audit, sir.
The ledger must be reconciled. Let us compare simulated reality versus the civilian transcript.
Compiling the final ledger, Senior Auditor. Comparing the real tabletop score to the simulated deep think score generated by your strategic framework.
Let us review reality first. In the Tabletop Titans broadcast, the Tyranids dominated the center of the board. They utilized spatial control and AP asymmetry to force the Tau into desperate, mathematically doomed rearguard actions.
Because of the battle shock anomaly and the failure to triage command points, the Tau scored minimal primary points after turn 3. Meanwhile, the Tyranids scored a massive 10+ primary points per turn in the late game.
But what happens in our simulation, Scribe? What happens if the Tau commander simply follows the math? What happens if the Twin Lance is held safely in tactical reserves until turn 3?
If the 160-point Twin Lance is held in reserve and emerges in turn 3, they execute Old One-Eye instantly in the artificially lowered floor of the midgame. The Tyranid central anchor evaporates immediately.
And with Old One-Eye dead?
With Old One-Eye dead, the central Tau Ghost Keel and Riptide are no longer under immediate lethal melee threat. They are suddenly free to systematically dismantle the Tyranid Exocrines and Maleceptor at range in turns 4 and 5.
The scoring shift is incredibly dramatic. Without the Tyranid melee pressure, the Tau easily hold 2 no-man's land objectives in turns 4 and 5. This generates a massive +15 victory point swing for the Tau Empire, and simultaneously creates a -10 victory point denial for the Tyranid Swarm.
On the secondary objective front, the surviving pristine Twin Lance secures Bring It Down by executing the heavy monsters, and uses its immense 42-inch threat radius to easily contest table quarters for engage on all fronts, netting another +8 victory points for the Tau.
What is the final calculation, Scribe? What is the final number?
The final calculation, sir. The Tau commander paid a 33-point compounded attrition tax for his turn 1 zealotry.
A 33-point compounded attrition tax. He paid 33 victory points simply for the privilege of rushing his apex asset forward in the first 20 minutes of the game. A 19-point real-world deficit is transformed into a 14-point simulated victory.
If executed with geometric and temporal discipline, the simulation yields a Tau victory of 51-37, rather than a catastrophic, embarrassing defeat at the hands of the hive mind.
They had the tools for absolute dominance. The failure lay entirely in their spatial application and the absolute disruption of the commander's morale under pressure. The math validates my orthodoxy absolutely. Treating a first strike scalpel as a blunt vanguard entity is mathematically equivalent to sabotaging your own supply lines.
The simulated victory is quite definitive. Senior Auditor, the ledger is perfectly balanced.
Look at this ledger, Scribe. Look at the absolute devastation printed on these data slates. The civilians will argue in their forums. They will blame the dice. They will blame the Tyranid Codex. But Tabletop Titans didn't lose a war of guns. They lost a war of spatial geometry.
Yes, sir.
They looked at the board and they saw heroes. They saw a Twin Lance charging gloriously into the maw of a Carnifex, hoping the dice would bless their courage with an improbable victory. But the dice do not care about courage. The dice only care about probability. And probability is a cruel, unforgiving master in a dying, entirely apathetic galaxy.
They are just temporary assets, sir.
Just temporary assets, Scribe, waiting for liquidation. Every Riptide, every Termagant, every desperate commander clinging to an objective marker in the mud. They are all just numbers moving inevitably towards 0 on a spreadsheet no one will ever read. We dress them up in painted armor, we give them grand designations like Retaliation Cadre, and we pretend their sacrifice means something.
But it doesn't.
No. In the end, the geometry is the only truth left in the dark. The L-shaped ruins don't weep when a crisis suit is cornered. The Spore Mines don't hesitate out of mercy. It is just cold, algorithmic inevitability. We fight so incredibly hard to control the board, completely forgetting that the board controls us. For the love of the Empire, tap that like and hit subscribe. Dismissed. Pay your tithes, citizens.